Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. So the Middle East is on fire again, and I mean that literally, not figuratively. US Central Command just released official video footage on the 13th, confirming that on the 12th, they deployed unmanned surface vessels, essentially sea drones, to strike Iranian targets for the very first time in actual combat history. This wasn't some test run, some training exercise, or a proof of concept demonstration. These were real live lethal combat operations conducted in an active war zone. According to Central Command's detailed statement, they used multiple one-way attack unmanned surface vessels, specifically aimed at an Iranian facility used for submarine and naval ship repairs. 3 of these so-called pirate-style unmanned boats directly slammed into port areas at the Bandar Abbas naval base with pinpoint accuracy. The accompanying video footage, which Central Command released alongside the statement, shows these drones screaming across the water at high speed, kicking up wakes, then detonating with massive violent explosions that sent shockwaves through the harbor. And Iran, they haven't been sitting idle either, not by a long shot over the past several days. They've launched their own retaliatory strikes against US military bases scattered across the Middle East, hitting multiple locations with rockets and drones of their own. This back and forth tit for tat has forcefully yanked the entire world's attention right back to the Persian Gulf region. And frankly, nobody knows where this escalation ends. Now, at the very core of this escalating mess is one single overriding, non-negotiable issue: control over the Strait of Hormuz. Ever since the war escalated to this current level of intensity, Iran has systematically tightened its stranglehold on this critical waterway. And I'm not just talking about harassing commercial ships in the main shipping lanes, which they've done before. They've gone much further this time. They're now forcibly rerouting all vessels through the narrow, constricted, and dangerous passage between Qashim Island and Larak Island. And here's the kicker: if you want to pass through there, you have to pay Iran a transit service fee, plain and simple. Outside intelligence and shipping reports indicate that fee is $2 million per S-hip. And they're even demanding payment in cryptocurrency to make it harder to track, sanction, or intercept. The United States simply cannot and will not accept that arrangement under any circumstances. And there are 2 hard, non-negotiable, absolutely fundamental reasons why. First and foremost, if Iran gets to permanently choke off the Strait of Hormuz, they effectively hold the jugular of America's Gulf allies, because the vast majority of their oil and natural gas exports have to flow right through that narrow bottleneck on a daily basis. Without free and uninterrupted passage, those economies don't just suffer, they collapse, and our regional partners are left completely vulnerable to Iranian blackmail and coercion. Second, Washington sees that toll as a flagrant, undeniable, and egregious violation of established international law and the global maritime order that the United States has defended for decades. Take June 23rd, for example. Secretary of State Rubio made it absolutely crystal clear in a public, on-the-record statement that the Strait of Hormuz is an international waterway. And no nation on earth has any legal right to charge international shipping for mere passage through it. That's not an opinion, that's not a negotiation point. That's a fundamental bedrock principle of international maritime law, and it applies to every global shipping lane without exception. Hormuz included, the Suez Canal included, the Panama Canal included, but here's where it gets completely insane and turns conventional wisdom on its head in ways that nobody saw coming. Just this week, Trump pulled a 180-degree U-turn that left everyone, allies, adversaries, and analysts alike, scratching their heads in bewilderment. He announced on his social media platform, as he often does with major policy shifts, that from now on, the United States will act as the self-proclaimed guardian of the Strait of Hormuz and start charging a brand new unilateral, American-imposed transit fee on every single commercial ship passing through those waters. And the price tag is even more shocking than Iran's already extortionate fee. It's not a fixed flat rate that you can budget for. It's 20% of the total cargo value calculated on every shipment, every voyage. Every time, that percentage absolutely dwarfs Iran's current $2 million per volt SL fixed fee. In many cases, it's 10 to 20 times more expensive, depending on the size, type, and value of the shipment. So the obvious, burning million-dollar question is, why would Trump float such a seemingly absurd, politically explosive, and diplomatically suicidal proposal? Can he actually force this through against overwhelming international opposition, including from our own European allies and Asian trading partners? And more importantly, why could this whole thing blow up in our faces in ways we haven't even considered or planned for to figure that out? We have to rewind the clock and go back to last month's US-Iran negotiations in excruciating detail, because the seeds of this disaster were planted right there. In reality, the two sides never came anywhere close to a genuine, lasting, or meaningful consensus on how the Strait of Hormuz should be managed going forward. And that's being generous. The United States insisted firmly and repeatedly that Iran must surrender all control and return the waterway to its pre-war free navigation status. No fees, no restrictions, no interference of any kind, no exceptions. Iran, on the other hand, dug in their heels and demanded that their newly established toll system must stay in place, regardless of what Washington wanted or threatened. In the end, after weeks of tense, arduous, and often hostile back and forth, all they managed to sign was a vague, fuzzy, and deliberately ambiguous memorandum of understanding, basically a 60-day ceasefire arrangement during which Iran would pause collecting fees, commit to gradually restoring normal commercial shipping traffic within 30 days, and take full responsibility for clearing naval mines and restoring safe navigation conditions through the strait. But the real, fundamental, insurmountable problem is that Washington and Tehran interpreted that same piece of paper in completely opposite, mutually exclusive, and irreconcilable ways. Trump came out and declared triumphantly to the world that the Strait of Hormuz is now permanently toll-free forever. No more fees, period, end of story, case closed. Except the memo itself only covers 60 days. There's absolutely no permanent clause anywhere in that document. No mention of forever. No language about perpetual free passage. Meanwhile, Iran's foreign minister gave a very different, carefully worded, and deliberately evasive spin in a state media interview, saying that the future management model for the strait will not be the same as before, and that related services will not be provided for free. In other words, they're not calling it a transit fee anymore, they're rebranding it as a service fee, same extortion, just a prettier, more diplomatic, more deniable name to throw at the international community. This kind of vague, hand-wavy, deliberately ambiguous agreement was never going to last, and honestly, anyone with half a brain and any knowledge of Middle Eastern politics could see that coming from a mile away. No sooner had the ceasefire been signed and the ink dried than both sides started fighting bitterly over exactly which route ships should take through the strait. Iran, even though they temporarily stopped collecting money at the checkpoint, still insisted that all vessels must pass through the Qeshm-Larak corridor because that's where they have their monitoring equipment, their radar installations, and their enforcement assets physically positioned. The United States, however, actively encouraged commercial ships to hug the Omani coastline, basically staying inside Omani territorial waters all the way through the transit. That way Iran would have no legal grounds to intercept them or demand payment, because they'd be in another country's sovereign waters and protected by Omani sovereignty. Washington's unspoken message was crystal clear. If the ships are in Omani waters, Iran has zero enforcement authority, and there's nothing they can do about it without starting a direct confrontation with Oman itself. But that clever tactical maneuver put Oman squarely in the crossfire of a geopolitical storm that they never asked for. For years and years, Oman has been the most reliable, trusted, and effective intermediary between the US and Iran, maintaining decent working relations with both sides and serving as a back channel for sensitive communications. Now, suddenly, they were being forced to pick a side in an escalating conflict that could destroy their carefully balanced foreign policy overnight. Iran wanted Oman to co-manage the toll collection system and split the revenue as equal partners. The United States issued a blunt, unambiguous, and threatening warning that any such arrangement was completely unacceptable and would be treated as a hostile act against American interests. Trump even went so far as to threaten direct military action if Oman chose the wrong side in this high-stakes standoff. He also emphasized in no uncertain terms that the Strait of Hormuz is international waters, that no country has the sovereign right to control it, and that the US would keep a close, watchful, and heavily armed eye, but under no circumstances would allow any nation to claim it as their own exclusive territory. A lot of seasoned analysts, retired military officers, and regional experts believe this very dispute over shipping routes, this seemingly technical argument about port calls and navigation corridors, was the main trigger that reignited full-scale hostilities between the two powers. Word on the ground from shipping intelligence is that the 3 commercial ships Iran attacked last week were exactly those hugging Oman's coastline at the time, trying to avoid Iranian-controlled waters and follow-us recommendations. In response to that brazen attack, The U.S. military quickly launched retaliatory strikes against Iranian positions, hitting radar sites and launch facilities. Once the fighting resumed in earnest and the ceasefire was dead, Iran announced it was shutting down the Strait of Hormuz again, demanding that all transiting vessels resubmit to their new fee structure under explicit threat of military action. Washington's response was equally tough, swift, and uncompromising. They reimposed a comprehensive, full-scale, and aggressively enforced naval blockade on Iranian ports, strictly restricting any ships from entering or leaving Iranian waters and warning that violators would be boarded or sunk. But what truly stunned the international community and sent shockwaves through global energy markets was Trump's follow-up move. The United States would now charge its own toll, and not a fixed amount, 20% of the cargo's value, calculated on every single shipment without exception. Let's run the real-world numbers on that to show you just how astronomically insane this proposal is and why it sent shipping executives into panic mode. A typical very large crude carrier, a VLCC, can hold about 2 million barrels of crude oil, at roughly $85 a barrel right now. And that's a conservative estimate given market volatility. That's about $170 million in total cargo value for a single voyage. 20% of that comes out to a staggering $34 million per single passage through the strait. Compare that to Iran's current $2 million per SHIP fee. That's only 1/17 of what the US plan would charge. When that announcement dropped, the entire globe was in an uproar, from shipping companies to oil importers to Wall Street traders to heads of state in Europe and Asia. Nobody saw it coming, and everybody was caught flat-footed. But to be perfectly honest, this isn't the first time Trump has floated something like this, so we shouldn't be completely shocked or pretend we didn't see the pattern going all the way back to his first term in office. He constantly complained, publicly and privately, loudly and repeatedly, that the U.S. Navy has been providing free maritime security for global shipping for decades on end, while American taxpayers have been footing the enormous, ever-growing bill entirely on their own without any compensation or gratitude. Since this current war broke out, he's repeated that argument even more aggressively and frequently, using it as a rhetorical hammer. Back in June, he openly said that if negotiations collapsed, the United States could legitimately act as the guardian of the region and charge Middle Eastern nations protection fees to compensate for America's past, present, and future expenditures in defending their oil exports and territorial integrity. Even earlier in April, Trump publicly stated that since the U.S. won the war, his words, not mine, America deserves to be compensated for its sacrifices, its victories, and its leadership. When a reporter asked him directly whether he would consider charging tolls for ships transiting the strait, his answer was blunt, unapologetic, and vintage Trump. Why not? We're the winners. We won the war. They already lost militarily. Isn't it perfectly reasonable to charge? He didn't hedge. He didn't qualify. He didn't walk it back. He just put it right out there for everyone to hear and debate. And honestly, this entire line of thinking is completely consistent with Trump's broader, long-standing, and deeply held foreign policy philosophy, which he's never made any secret of. In his view, the United States has been taken advantage of by its allies for far too long, whether it's NATO allies in Europe who don't meet their defense spending commitments, or our partners in the Gulf who rely on our carriers and our air power while contributing minimally to their own defense, and they all need to pay more for the massive security umbrella we provide around the world. He sees it as a business transaction, not an alliance of shared values, not a commitment to international order, and certainly not a charity. He expects a return on investment for every dollar spent overseas. In the short term, this kind of aggressive transactional approach might actually bring in some additional revenue to the Treasury and make a few headlines about America getting paid. But over the long haul, it's very likely to backfire in a huge, damaging, and strategically disastrous way that we'll deeply regret. Once the United States turns the entire global security system into a purely commercial, pay-to-play transaction, other countries will only work harder and faster to reduce their dependence on us. The Gulf states are no exception to that rule. They'll accelerate their efforts to build alternative transport routes that bypass the Strait of Hormuz entirely, push forward with new pipeline infrastructure projects across their deserts, develop overland corridor agreements with neighboring countries, and most importantly, start looking for other major security partners who don't charge them an arm and a leg for protection and who offer stable, predictable relationships. And if you look around the world at who has the resources, the naval capacity, the diplomatic networks, and the sheer geopolitical ambition to fill that vacuum, the most likely candidate is, without a shadow of a doubt, China. They've been waiting for an opening like this for years, quietly building ports, signing partnerships, and expanding their blue water navy. We might just be handing that opening to them on a silver platter, gift wrapped and delivered by our own short-term thinking. All right? That's all for today's episode. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.